film begins in 1956 in Terrorised, France, when a lad named Jack arrives to the church and Father Noir asks him to bring wine. They then go to a church to do their daily chores, and Jack returns to the house. When he returns to the cellar to store the wine, he notices a football there. He kicks the ball toward a dark chamber, and when he hears a sound from there, he begins to play. "I'm heading in that direction." Suddenly, the bottle smashes, causing Jack to flee in terror and inform Father. Someone is present. Only then do they notice a noise coming from the church, so they go in to investigate. And Father adds that whoever he is and whatever his reason for coming, he is in God's house, and he is watching him. Suddenly, two eyes glow in the darkness, and Noir is lifted into the air, set on fire, and burned to death. Then we see Sister Irene, who now lives in seclusion in Italy. Deborah, according to the Mother Superior, causes fresh problems every day, and today she even refused to go to confession. Irene then visits Sister Deborah, who tells her that her family is from Mississippi, but that when she was 4 years old, some white people discovered them and burned down their house. After that, her brothers joined the army, and her father reasoned that if his sons were serving the country, why shouldn't his daughter serve God? Later, the Mother Superior tells all the sisters about the Church of St. Carta and how the demon ruthlessly murdered the nuns there one by one, and then stole their shape to undermine their faith. Following this, the Vatican dispatched a priest and a nun to exorcise the demon. They defeated him by using Jesus' blood, and both of them triumphed. Nobody knows what happened to the nun after the priest was made a bishop. Morris then appears, working in a French boarding school where he has made friends with a young Irish girl named Sophie, as well as a teacher and her mother, Kate. Later, Sophie offers him a friendship bracelet she designed particularly for him, but a girl steals it and starts mocking Sophie. And when Morris asks her to return it, she refuses because he is only a servant. Morris assures her that, despite being a servant, he understands the importance of treating everyone with love and respect. Only then does Madame Laurent appear, asking everyone to return to their courses and informing Morris that there are cockroaches in her chamber once more, to which Morris departs, claiming that he would go and check immediately away. A delivery girl later arrives to the boarding school to deliver groceries. She's on her way back after storing the items in the storeroom when she hears some unusual noises. When she walks inside to check on Morris, she notices him acting abnormally, and when she asks him if he's okay, he looks at her, prompting her to collapse in fear. Following this, she encounters the demon nun, whom she attempts to flee, but the door closes and the nun kills her by breaking her neck. Later that night, Mother Superior informs Irene that she has a visitor. Saying this, she leaves, and when Irene returns, she is surprised to discover Morris there. He begs her to help him and transforms into a monster, jolting Irene up from her slumber. Cardinal appears the next day and informs her that some unfortunate events have occurred. A 90-year-old nun in Hungary shot herself on the steps of a church. A priest in Austria stabbed his neck with a rosary during Christmas Mass, and an Italian girl who had come to become a nun hanged herself. According to the pattern, the demon is traveling westward into Europe, although its roots are connected to Romana. She inquired if they had spoken with Father Burke. The cardinal responds that he is no longer alive and that she is the only one who has encountered the devil. Thus, the church wants her to investigate. Irene refuses because she nearly died in St. Carta, to which Cardinal responds that she performed a miracle in that monastery and the church requires another miracle. Sister Deborah now joins Irene on her journey to Terrorised without authorization. Irene becomes enraged and asks why she has come, to which she responds that she wants to believe in miracles. But when she hears some priests declare that they converted the wine into Jesus' blood, she finds it impossible to believe. Irene claims that when people believe in their religion, wine becomes the blood of Jesus. Only because of their faith have all exceptional things come true. Meanwhile, Sophie's classmates find an excuse to take her to the abandoned chapel. Madame had prohibited them from leaving. When she gets in, they tell her they're going to play a game called Defy the Devil. Sophie claims she doesn't see the devil, to which she responds that the devil is constantly present but she isn't paying attention. She then informs her that the devil is watching her and that she should not turn back no matter what she hears. When Sophie's attention is drawn to a painting in front of her, the three girls leave her alone, and when she realizes this, she runs to escape, but the girls lock her inside. Sophie requests that they open the door, but she is interrupted by a disturbance from behind her and the discovery of a statue draped in white linen. The statue begins to move towards her, and she catches a glimpse of the nun. Only then does Morris unlock the door. She emerges from the chapel, terrified, and Morris inquires as to what transpired. He then asks the females whether they think it's funny, and they all become terrified and flee. Later, Irene and Deborah arrive in Terrorised, where a nun greets them and informs them that Mass is still held here, but no one attends. People believe that the devil has arrived and that their church has been cursed. Irene senses the devil's presence there, and then the church door opens, revealing Jack. Deborah asks him if she is okay after he gives her a burned rosary. They then go to Father Noirt's room, and Irene asks if there was a boy there that night. The nun confirms that he witnessed everything, but his mother forbids him from discussing it with anyone. Irene inquired if anyone else was there in the church at the time, whereupon she responds by saying that there was a helper here who left the day after the accident. He was from Romania, and the locals called him Frenchie. When she was possessed by Satan, he returned to save her. She realizes that this is how the demon is surviving and that he is doing so through Morris. Meanwhile, Kate expresses gratitude to Morris for saving Sophie from those girls. He inquires as to why the chapel is kept closed, and she informs him that Madame's son Cedric died there during the bombardment. She then walks away, and Sophie, who is observing Morris from the window, catches him standing and staring up at one point. Only then does Kate call her, and as she walks in that direction, she notices her mother ascending the stairs. She follows her upstairs, where she finds the demonic nun, who attacks her with crows and then vanishes. Sophie becomes terrified and begins to go downstairs, where Nun appears before her once more, but Kate arrives with all of the students, and Sophie notices Nun's form on the wall. Later, Irene and Deborah visit a hotel where they have a reservation, but the receptionist informs them that their names are not on the register. Deborah pauses to speak with the manager, and Irene steps outside, where some children rush by, but one boy pauses to tie his shoelaces. Irene recognizes him as Jax and approaches him, telling him that she is Irene and that the church has sent her to assist. She inquires whether he had the rosary with him that night, to which he responds that it was Father Noirt's and that he took it because he was terrified. Only then do the children return, and Jax departs with them. However, when Irene pursues them, they all vanish, and she is astonished to see this. After a while, she sees Jax again and follows him until she comes to a halt in front of a magazine store. Following this, the pages of those magazines begin to flip mechanically, forming an image of Nun on them. Irene is afraid when she sees this, and she then hears a disturbance from behind her, but she doesn't see anyone. She turns around and begins to move towards the figure when the demonic nun assaults her, leading her to see a vision of a guy tearing out a nun's eyes. She then notices the same nun in front of her, holding a box. We observe Irene lying there unconscious while her eyes glow. Meanwhile, Madame Laurent encounters possessed Morris, who is standing in front of the chapel's door, and as she approaches him, he turns around afraid, and when she asks him what he is doing, he claims he doesn't know. Now when he's gone, she hears her kid calling her from behind that door, and someone tries to unlock it. Madame unlocks the door and enters to investigate, and she is surprised to see Cedric there. Nun then places his hand on his shoulder and begins striking Madame, causing a hook to fall on her and killing her. When Irene regains consciousness the next day, Deborah asks her what occurred the night before. Irene informs her that she got a vision and now knows what the devil desires, and that he is using Morris to locate it, and that once he finds it, he will kill him. Deborah claims that Jax appeared to her while she was unconscious and offered her a rosary. Irene examines it and states that she has seen this mark before but cannot recall where. Deborah claims she saw it in a photo of one of the demon's victims and believes there is a link. Meanwhile, Kate discovers Madame's dead body in the chapel and is taken aback. Later, the police remove Madame's body, and Kate informs Morris that Sophie has not been discovered, to which he responds that she should not worry since he will locate her. After some time of searching, he finally finds Sophie and sits down with her to chat to her. Sophie claims that Madame never went to chapel and that there is something wrong with this institution. Morris inquires if she witnessed or heard anything. No, she responds, she just feels that way. Irene and Deborah visit the Palais des Papes and present the library and the rosary. He informs them that the rosary's insignia is St. Lucy's family crest. Knowing this, Irene recalls her vision and declares that demon desires those eyes. He then informs them that after Lucia was killed by unbelievers, her family managed to flee. They spread throughout the world and began to guard a sacred relic, the eyes of St. Lucia, with all their might. Deborah inquires as to what the demon will do to her eyes. He says he doesn't know, but the demon they're talking about now was formerly an angel who was rejected by God and stripped of his powers. Irene asks him for his powers back, to which he responds that the demon is endless, which is why he has been killing her family since St. Lucia. He warns Irene that she will have to utilize those eyes this time to send the monster back to hell. Irene replies they have no idea where the relic is, to which he responds that it has reached a monk named Jean-Paul Ritter, who has written a letter to the Vatican stating that he has buried those eyeballs someplace in his monastery, which is an hour distant. That monastery was later sold to a winery, but it is presently used as a residential school. Returning to school, Irene tells Deborah that her mother was a devout Christian who claimed that God himself spoke to her and gave her visions, but her father dismissed her as insane and immoral. Her father once took her to a doctor, and then one day the doctor's people took her away and she never saw her again. Meanwhile, while Morris is with Sophie and Kate, something begins to happen to him, and she spots the inverted cross on his neck. The nun suddenly emerges behind Sophie, terrifying everyone, and Morris tries to flee with them. Meanwhile, Irene and Deborah arrive, and Morris is surprised to see them and informs them that he has returned. He introduces himself as Irene and promises Kate and Sophie that she will assist them, but Irene begs him to leave them alone. She then tells him that the monster is inside him, but Morris is skeptical. He is then taken over by the devil and attempts to flee, and as Irene pursues him, he attacks and throws her away. Deborah tries to stop him, but he tosses her away as well. Now Irene instructs him to leave this man in the name of God, leading him to weaken and fall down, and Deborah hits and knocks him unconscious. They then tie him up with a rope and head to that chapel with Kate and Sophie. Irene informs them that she is hunting for a relic concealed here by a monk. Sophie informs them that the goat is the devil, and that the goat's eyes change crimson when sunlight shines through the window. Deborah exits and uses a torch from the opposite side to make the eyes of the goat on the mosaic glow crimson. The red light directs them to the location of St. Lucy's eyes, and they begin digging there. Only then does Sophie discover that the goat has vanished from the mosaic. But she doesn't inform anybody, and they also obtain St. Lucia's eyes during this time. Meanwhile, Deborah encounters a terrified girl who informs her that she believes there is someone up there. Deborah shines her torch upstairs and sees a demon goat approaching the girl. But before he can reach her, Deborah protects her and locks her in the hostel. The monster starts beating on the door, and an invisible force begins picking and flinging the females. Hearing their shouts, Kate begins to walk towards the dorm, but Morris intercepts her and throws her away. Following this, he pounces on Irene, causing the relic to fall from her grasp, and he is about to kill Irene when Sophie flees with the relic, and Morris abandons Irene and begins chasing her. Deborah saves all of the females and flees to another room. They attempt to enter Madame's room through a vent, but one of the girls is startled to discover Madame there and informs the others that Madame is standing in her room. When they all try to help her, Madame grabs her head and pulls her inside, and the girl notices that cockroaches are coming out of Madame's mouth. Meanwhile, Sophie is hiding in the bell tower and Morris is looking for her. When the relic begins to shine, Morris discovers her, but he is unable to harm her because of the relic, and Sophie is able to flee. He begins to pursue her, but the bell tower collapses, and Irene runs in to save Sophie. Sophie is then saved. However, the wooden board begins to fall apart but becomes caught due to a and as soon as he catches Sophie, the rope snaps, causing Morris to fall. Irene enters the building in search of Sophie and discovers her, telling her that she has such eyes. When Morris stands up again, Irene uses the relic against him, causing his eyes and nose to bleed. He begs her to stop saying he'll die, and then he collapses. They believe he is dead, and Irene begins to cry as she recalls the time she spent with him. But he suddenly takes the relic from her grasp, which begins to burn in his hand. And as the demon regains his abilities, his eyes begin to sparkle. The demon in nun shape then arrives, and the demonic goat appears and charges the girls, but they manage to enter the chapel and try to stop him by locking the door. Meanwhile, the nun strangles Deborah with a chain, and when Irene goes to save her, Sophie attempts to flee but is caught on both ends by the nun. The nun then throws Irene into the air and sets fire to her, but she does not burn because she is a descendant of St. Lucy. She then falls on the alcohol on the floor, which enraged the demon. Deborah approaches Irene and tells her it was a miracle. Irene notices the wine spilling on the grounds, and it is only then that she hears Sophie's scream and runs to her aid. Sophie is trapped by the demon, and Morris approaches her with a knife, but Morris stops himself from killing her. When Irene notices this, she invites Deborah to pray alongside her, and she transforms the wine into Jesus' blood, causing the Valak to be burned and returned to hell, and the film ends here. Thank you for joining us on our horror. If you enjoyed the chills, please consider subscribing. Share your opinions in the comments section to keep the dread alive. Stay airy, and we'll see you soon.